once again to our committee. You know the procedure, sir, fairly well. We will ask you for an opening statement. That will be followed by questions by our committee members. So with that brief introduction, sir, welcome once again, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, and thank you very much for having us back to conclude our remarks here today. As you know, my name is Mike Palasek. I'm a letter carrier from Vancouver, and I'm the National President of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. And I have with me today here our Director of Research, Jeff Bickerton. He's been with our union since 1977, and he's been intimately involved even in the formation of Canada Post as a Crown Corporation and every single review which has come after. So I would hope that between the two of us we can come up with some answers for whatever you ask. As you know from our letter to the committee chair, CUPW has done a critique of the task force's discussion paper. As promised, I believe last time we were here we said we would do that and submit it to you for consideration. This document outlines our concerns about the financial matters and postal banking. And I would like to highlight some of our concerns and also answer any questions you might have. Of course, I won't have time to be comprehensive in this. First, the labor costs. In one place, the discussion paper states that Canada Post's productive unit of labor is up to 41% more costly than those of comparable businesses in the private sector. In another place, it states the Canada Post productive labor rate is 45% more than its competitors. Based on information that Canada Post provided us with, the difference is nowhere near 41% or 45%. You can see this on page 2 of our critique. Moving on to financial performance. The task force based much of its negative projections for the future on its analysis of the past 5 years, but they got it wrong by lumping the results together. In 2011, they didn't look at the impact of the one-time events such as the pay equity payment, estimated at $250 million, or the one-time increase of $63 million in pension benefit costs. Without these one-time costs, Canada Post would have made a profit from operations in spite of the rotating strikes and full-scale lockout in 2011, which has been estimated to cost between $50 and $70 million. For 2012, the task force reported a loss, which is not true. Canada Post reported a $94 million profit in 2012, but restated it in 2013 for comparative purposes only, when the corporation introduced new accounting standards. For 2013, the task force completely ignores the huge impact of the one-time accounting changes and instead cites the financial results as evidence of long-term unsustainability. The fact is that Canada Post would have reported a $321 million net profit had it not been for those accounting changes in 2013. For 2014, the task force acknowledges a profit but attributes it largely to March price increases that generated $214 million in revenue. They neglect to mention the impact of the increase in the benefit cost discount rate, which reduced benefit costs by $181 million. For 2015, the task force doesn't say much except that it was a profitable year. Canada Post, on the other hand, tried to attribute the profits in 2015 to the CMB conversion program, even though the conversions happened at the end of the year and the impact in reducing costs was minimal. The 2015 profits were the result of increased in parcel volumes, productivity gains, and Canada Post's ability to reduce staffing in response to lost volumes. It was also achieved despite a decrease in the benefit discount rate from 5% to 4%, which increased the benefit cost by $189 million. For 2016, Task Force predicts a loss before taxes of $63 million. They predict a loss, in spite of the fact that all evidence points to another profitable year for Canada Post. Canada Post reported $45 million profits before tax in the first 6 months of 2016. This represents the highest profits for the same period since 2010, when they started reporting profits quarterly. Plus, this was all achieved in spite of Canada Post instructing large volume mailers not to mail during June of 2016 when they drove their business away, threatening a labor dispute. The corporation has a long track record of being wrong. I would ask you that you review page 6 of our critique for this. Just a few more observations before we move to the questions. The task force makes only one reference to our new collective agreement. They cite a clause in the urban contract requiring that there be 493 corporate retail outlets. They see this clause as negative. We do not. They either failed to mention or were not told by Canada Post about two very positive developments. The task force does not mention the new rules that were negotiated that will allow Canada Post to significantly increase its market share in ad mail and the parcel market, particularly by delivering parcels on evenings and weekends. Similarly, there is no mention of the new activity values in the RSMC agreement that will increase productivity. On to postal banking. In addition to the financial issues, we have critiqued the task force's observations on postal banking. We hope you will read this section with interest. I would just like to highlight two major errors right now. The task force's report says on page 82 that only 7% of Canadians who like the idea would actually use a postal bank. But according to their own polling, it's not 7% of those who support the concept, but 7% of all Canadians. Furthermore, another 22% of Canadians say they would probably use a postal bank. In short, the task force's poll suggests postal banking has huge potential, and up to 29% of the country say they would probably use it. The second error is found on page 86, where the discussion paper states having the government entity competing in the financial sector would contravene Canada's trade agreements with other countries. This statement is also incorrect. A postal bank would be subject to trade agreements and would have to operate within those rules, but there is currently nothing in any trade agreement which would prevent a postal bank from actually operating. In conclusion, we believe the task force's paper should be disregarded as it is biased, based on errors, omissions, misrepresentations, and unsupported speculation. Thank you for listening.
We'll now go to our 7-minute rounds of questioning. We'll start with M. Ayoub. 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to both of you for being present, and it's good to see you again. Mr. Pellicek especially. I received your document this morning, and I don't want to go into the details of the numbers because, of course, I didn't have time to analyze it in order to really understand every last nuance. However, it is easily observed since the beginning, and that holds true for today. It has been so from the beginning that there is a serious gap between the perception and the understanding of the facts, whether it be the numbers, the studies, or even if it be the perception of reality to a certain extent. Therefore, I would like your point of view. Do you recognize that there are changes to be made in order to keep Canada Post viable when it comes to quality, when it comes to services, and for its future? What are those changes, in your opinion? If it's not the changes that Canada Post management are suggesting, what kind of changes would you propose? Very quickly.
Yeah, so we would certainly recognize that Canada, the postal industry is a changing industry. We don't think it's a dying industry, but certainly some changes will have to be made. We think that Canada Post should do what other post offices around the world are doing and have been doing for some time, which is diversifying. They should be looking at new services that they could provide that would bring in additional revenue. However, we do completely reject the idea that there's a crisis at Canada Post right now. The truth is we have time to act. Canada Post has consistently been profitable, and they're actually very well situated to adapt to these changes as they come. Mr. Chopra said something yesterday which struck me as odd. He said that if the last letter was delivered without any changes to the structure, now that last letter would cost us $3 billion to deliver. And that's factually incorrect. The truth of the matter is Canada Post can adjust their staffing levels right now as volumes fluctuate. And that's evidenced by the fact that over the last 10 years, the number of letter carriers has fallen by exactly the same percentage as the number of letters, as letter mail decline.
Comment on peut décrire la situation?
How can we describe the situation of the communication between the unions, yours in particular, and upper management, and what's happening? Because it's not new that there's differences. It's not new that it's hard to achieve a certain alignment. I said it to Mr. Chopra, and I'll repeat it to you. I have the impression that you're at opposite ends of the perception of the situation, and you're not working towards the same goal. You're each working on your own side with different objectives. And it's a source of concern. That's where we can't get everyone working together, achieving synergy in order to achieve a common goal. Everyone should be engaged to achieve that objective, and I get the impression that is not working, and I have the impression that it's something that hasn't worked not just for a short period of time. That communication has not been effective.
Well, I think that by the very nature of an employer-union relationship, it's necessarily an adversarial relationship in some regards. That being said, over the last year, as we've gone through bargaining...
I don't agree. Huh?
Okay.
I can say right away I don't agree with that, but it's okay. I understand. I thought it would be a better way to work as a team. If it's a confrontation every time, well, we have the perfect example right now.
No, absolutely. Through that, we need to look for our common ground and look for common goals that we can achieve and things that we can work on and so on. But there is necessarily some element of a back and forth between labor and employer, and that's all I was referring to. It's certainly been heightened over the past few years, where I think all of the unions have made clear we felt quite disrespected throughout this process over the last couple of years. Certainly there were increased tensions around our bargaining, but we continue to meet. I met with Mr. Chopra and senior management just a couple of weeks ago.
Est-ce que vous reconnaissez qu'il faut vraiment...
You recognize that it's necessary to find common ground and sit down to be able to work together. Common ground in order to lead to concrete progress. And not just for 1, 2, 3 years, because we don't want to come back to this 2 or 3 years with the same types of problems. It's the longevity of negotiations, the longevity of the business relationship. I think that's what needs to be worked on, and I need to feel that on both sides, both management and the union, that willingness exists, and not to remain stuck in different positions, because the perception that I have now, and we'll see how it works out in the report, but the perception that I have now is that everybody is in a very different position, and I find that unfortunate.
Parce que tout le monde aime Post Canada.
Because everyone loves Canada Post. That's the beauty of the thing. Everybody loves Canada Post. Everywhere throughout Canada that we visited, that was the opinion.
Unfortunately, we've really seen, a pattern of disrespect and misrepresentation from this management team at Canada Post, and we're doing what we can to overcome some of these issues that have been raised quite sharply over the last couple of years. But we can't pretend that this didn't happen.
Les relations étaient-elles meilleures avant la venue de la...
Was the relationship better before new management was in place, before 2011? Was it better then, the relationship between the union and upper management?
Well, I personally wasn't in the national office of the union prior to that. CUPW has certainly had a rocky relationship
Mr.
with management.
Bickerton was there
years.
for a
Perhaps Jeff can
long
answer.
time.
Well, I'm sorry.
A very brief answer, please.
Briefly, we've had good times, we've had hard times. The relationship, I think, has taken a very negative turn since 2011, to be frank.
Monsieur Clark, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Clark, 7 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Mr. Pelisek, you are the National President of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. It's lovely to meet you, sir. And we met many of your members throughout our trip all over Canada during the 22 public hearings. And I think you've already done it, is that you do not have confidence in the working group's report, or which, in your opinion, is erroneous and based on erroneous facts. One of the aspects that came up among your members on several occasions is that the task force report was based on accounting numbers from Ernst & Youngers, which was based on the conference board. And I would like to ask you the following question. Last week, or this week, Monday, I asked Ernst & Young, which appeared before this committee, I asked if their numbers were based on the conference boards, and they said no, absolutely not. I don't understand why your members keep repeating that particular criticism when it has not been confirmed. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I would agree that the task force report was based on Ernst & Young's numbers. We don't actually have access to all of that information as to what they based it off of. But certainly...
No, Mr. Caveau, your members say that the 700 million deficit is not accurate because Ernst & Young based their study, accountable study, on the conference board findings. That's what all your members said across Canada. But Ernst & Young has confirmed here last Monday that their numbers are not based on the conference board findings. So,
I would agree with you. I don't think that they were based on the...
Okay, interesting. Findings. You know, the 5 plan points, is there anything you agree with on this plan? Have you ever proposed another plan?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
we came up with a number of plans that we've actually put forward with Canada Post around service expansion, around greening Canada Post, around a whole number of issues, absolutely. And I believe Mr. Chopra actually pointed out yesterday that every bit of innovation they've done over the last number of years has come from us. Okay.
But when the 5 plan points was released, have you on your side released an official other routes, other avenue to take? Like, have you officially released a document with a plan? That could have been a good thing, maybe, you know.
Yeah, we released a 7-point plan in response to Canada Post plan, but this is going back to early 2014, and we've certainly put forward a whole number of documents advocating directions Canada Post could go and options it can take since then.
And how was this plan received by the direction?
I don't believe they ever commented on it.
Okay. And finally, I would like, sir, that you share with us all the different efforts that was put forward by your organization, your group, your members, in the last years. What exactly have your members been really ready to do, to change, in so that they can help us, Canada Post, to go through the 21st century and, all the different aspects of the new world in terms of delivery and everything?
Well, I think we put forward very comprehensive documents to the task force itself and submitted them to this committee a few months ago, explaining the various avenues we think Canada Post can go. Of course, we've also had our members participating in the Save Canada Post campaign, discussing with communities, pushing for options such as postal banking, which has now been supported by over 600 municipalities across this country. So we've spent the last 2.5 years really reaching out to the public that we serve and talking about the services that they'd like to receive from their public post office.
Oui, mais dans les dernières années, est-ce qu'il y a eu des
In the last few years, have there been any concrete changes in your working conditions or your benefits?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Quels ont été les
What have been the concrete changes when it comes to your working conditions in the last few years?
As you know, we've just ratified a new collective agreement. Prior to that, in resulting from the 2011 Back to Work legislation, we saw a major reduction in the starting wage for new hires at Canada Post. We saw the elimination of our sick leave plan in favor of a short-term disability plan, hundreds of millions of dollars in labor cost savings that came from our members.
Mais parce que ce que j'ai l'impression, moi, souvent,
I often have the impression that your labor organization does not recognize the difficulties, the financial difficulties that Canada Post has been going through over the last few years. However, in the last few years, you have accepted new collective agreements which reflect somewhat the recognition of a precarious situation that Canada Post is in. How do you explain that, on the one hand, you don't recognize the financial difficulties, and yet, on the other hand, you accepted changes to the collective agreement? Was it because it was imposed on you? I'm not sure if you understand what I mean by that.
With the 2011 contract, we would certainly say that it was imposed on us. We did come to negotiated agreements in the end, but it was very much under the threat of the unconstitutional legislation imposed by the last government.
Okay.
That being said, we recognize Canada Post is in a situation where it's changing. It's a changing industry. We reject the idea that it's in a crisis. We think their own numbers and their consistent profitability outside of a couple of one-time events demonstrate that.
Merci.
Mademoiselle Trudel, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Trudel, 7 minutes, please. Good morning. I'm glad to see you again this morning. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to receive Mr. Chopin before the committee, and I know that you attended and heard. I would like to know if you have any other elements that you would like to bring us today following what he said. New elements, or perhaps what you heard, and which, in your opinion, those elements did not necessarily correspond with what you are putting forward.
Well, I thought a number of things mentioned by Mr. Chopra yesterday were kind of surprising, and I'm going from memory, but I remember him saying that they lost $300 million in revenue in 2009 and talking about what a bad situation Canada Post was in 2009. And he neglected to mention that 2009, actually, they reported their largest profit in corporate history. I thought that was a little funny. I thought it was strange that he would talk about the role of management and CUPW in innovation. And frankly, he was heaping a lot of praise on us that we've never heard before outside of a room like this. But again, completely neglecting to mention that we have our Appendix T committee and our Urban Collective Agreement, which is the Service Expansion and Innovation and Change Committee, which is actually a joint committee of management with 2 management reps and 2 union reps. And he also failed to mention that they spent the last year demanding that be cut out of our collective agreement. It was actually one of the last issues left on the table before we were able to settle. So I think we met a very different Deepak Chopra yesterday than we're used to be honest.
Merci.
Thank you. The more that we move forward with stakeholders and what Mr. Chopra put forward, in your opinion, do you think that the Canada Post Corporation is a public service which must offer service to the public above all? Or should we manage it more like a private business?
Well, I think Canada Post is mandated by legislation. The aim of it is to provide a public service and to be self-sufficient in doing so. We don't see a reason to change that. Well, the one point that our union has historically differed from is that we don't believe that the profits of Canada Post should be going back to the government, but actually should be reinvested in Canada Post.
Pouvez-vous nous donner des exemples?
Could you give me some examples of reinvestments into the corporation that Canada Post could do?
Well, certainly over the last decades, Canada Post has made billions of dollars in profit that have been returned to the public purse in the form of taxes and dividends and other things. We think it would make a lot more sense to reinvest that into the service. And so that could be, something like expanding services into postal banking, but it could also easily be expanding the services that it provides to Canadians. Even expanding door-to-door delivery is on the cards when they're as profitable as they have been.
Tout à l'heure, on parlait d'objectifs.
Earlier, we spoke of common goals, following a question asked by my colleague, and I would like to hear more of what you have to say, indicating what could favor the establishment of common ground between the Postal Workers Union and Canada Post in order to be able to move forward, in order to ensure that there is a relationship based on communication. And what would that common ground be that we could put forward?
Well, I would suggest the common ground we should be looking for is actually how to expand services and how to serve the public. And we've consistently been putting this forward with the employer. We haven't found a lot of willingness to be receptive around that. And I think certainly, I know it's been mentioned, the unions at Canada Post have felt quite disrespected by not being consulted on these things, by being given only minutes notice of announces of major changes. And I don't think that sort of thing is conducive to any cooperative relationship. I mean,
Alors, il me reste du temps, je vais en profiter.
I have some time, so I'll take advantage. In the report that you tabled, I see that there was a comparison of Canada Post versus versus the private sector when it comes to salaries. Yesterday, I asked a question about payroll, everything that has to do with administration and supervision at Canada Post. I got the impression that we seem to be really putting the weight of financial losses on the backs of workers. Do you think that if we could look at administration, that there would be something we could do? And do you feel that there's a willingness from Canada Post to do a reorganization of its administration, their vice presidents, or their structure?
sometimes I think, why don't you just let us run the post office? We'd do a better job of it. But in all seriousness, I don't think Canada Post needs nearly the governance and management structure that it has. It's very top heavy, and you're right. Most of the burden has been placed onto the workforce in order to make cuts. Although one point I'd maybe disagree on is you said that losses have been placed onto the workers to combat losses. In fact, there haven't been losses. Canada Post hasn't taken a penny of taxpayers' money in decades, and frankly doesn't need to. The couple losses that we have seen have been from one-time events, as we've explained previously, and we fully expect them to make a profit again this year.
Madame Shanahan.
Thank you, Chair.
Don't touch.
Okay.
Perhaps you could try one of your colleagues' mics instead. I'm not sure if we'll be able to get this rectified.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for being here this morning, panel. So I'm interested in reflecting back to you some of the things that we heard on the road, because we heard yesterday from management, we've heard from the unions, but we also heard from Canadians, from your customers across the country. And there's really two types of customers, are there not? There's the individual Canadians receiving delivery, and they're concerned about how that happens and the services that they get at the post office. And there's the commercial customers, and that's where the business is growing, is in that parcel delivery, and I'm very intrigued by what we heard from small sellers, from the e-commerce people, from the eBay people working through eBay and Shopify and so on, and that's where it's happening. But what we also heard was that there's a need for flexibility in delivery options, whatever that is, because the sellers need to be sure that their customers are receiving the goods, that there needs to be a flexibility in the services that are provided through the post office. And with that comes a need for flexibility in making sure that it's a competitive offer that Canada Post is able to provide. So that's where I'd like to ask you some questions, first of all, around the financial performance. When we talk about the difference in the labor costs, why do you think there's such a wide discrepancy between the calculations that the management has and yourselves?
Well, to start with, I don't think there is a discrepancy. We're relying on management's numbers when we talk about labor costs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, Mr. Pelisek.
Yeah, so the table that we presented in our critique, those are Canada Post's numbers. They're not ours. We didn't come up with them. I believe the 41% and 45% number that was been thrown around came from Ernst & Young, and I'm not sure why their numbers would be so different than Canada Post's.
Maybe I'm just conjecturing here. Is it possible that they're folding in that solvency deficit?
No, the numbers that we're looking at here actually are taken from Canada Post's document that they provided to us in bargaining, and it includes total compensation, including all of the cost of pensions, all the cost of future benefits, based on productive hours, which includes then vacation time, rest periods, you name it. So what you should know is every number that we have provided here is from Canada Post, unless we say otherwise. So we have provided some numbers from the conference board, but everything else in our document is from Canada Post. We have no disagreement with the numbers they produce. However, their predictions and how they portray the situation is often wildly inaccurate.
Okay. And I do agree with you that you know, the numbers can vary greatly. We heard that yesterday as well from Mr. Cheeseman, you know, plus or minus 50 million. It can go either way on a $6 billion chiffre d'affaires revenue number. That's, you know, I have certainly seen that in my career that those numbers can change, and it can be you know, based on adjustments for accounting and so on. But I guess where I really want to go is going forward, since we need to drive those revenue numbers. Is the union open to being flexible on things like pension benefits? Where there would be, you know, if there was an option to decouple the pension from Canada Post, operate it separately, have joint governance. Are you open to the sharing of the risks that would entail?
As we've informed, actually both this committee and Canada Post, we're willing to discuss any of the options put forward that don't entail cuts to our members' benefits and retirees' benefits. That being said, I think the task force has actually put forward a number of options that would accomplish that, and we would like to discuss them for sure.
Okay, so you are open to the kind of flexibility that would be needed to negotiate more competitive labor costs going forward?
Well, I think we already have negotiated more competitive labor costs. And let's be clear, Canada Post is perfectly capable of competing right now in the parcel market. And that's evidenced by the fact that they deliver 2 out of 3 parcels in this country right now. Canada Post has no problems competing.
Okay. Okay, Chair, do I have
You have another minute if you wish.
another minute? Okay, so going to the what we've discussed on opening up the services. If we were to look at what the core competency is of Canada Post, it really is in that delivery of A, letter mail, but B, parcel mail. Do you see a way forward, because you've talked a lot about postal banking, and you know, there's a lot of pros and cons on that. Do you see a way forward in just concentrating on the core competencies, or do you see that Canada Post absolutely needs to have the postal banking to survive?
Well, I think Canada Post absolutely needs to be looking at service expansion of some sort, and we believe that postal banking is probably the best way to do that. But I wouldn't actually agree that Canada Post's core competencies are only in delivery. I mean, we have thousands of members who never deliver anything, that focus on retail, that already do you know, passport checks and money transfers and other financial operations. So I think we do have competencies in those areas as well.
Okay, very much. Mr. McCauley, 5 minutes, please.
Welcome back, gentlemen. You know, we talked a lot about, you know, past performance, about Canada Post made this about money in the past, and, you know, I can't help but reminded of, you know, the line from mutual funds that past performance is not indicative of future returns. And, you know, we don't address, you know, the longer term when we talk about, you know, hey, we made 50 million last year or 80 million the year before. When 10 years out, we see the massive decline of the transactional mail or the address mail. Like, do you accept that there is this huge gap coming on finances from the drop in the door-to-door? And do you see value in some of the switches that have been made under the 5-point plan, like the community mailboxes? Do you think there's a way forward or a further need to convert, recognizing that the door-to-door mail is dropping and dropping fast?
Well, I think we believe that Canada Post is very well situated to adapt to falling or declining mail volumes. And as I said earlier, we can see that in the fact that they have been able to adjust their staffing levels in direct accordance to the decline in letter mail already. We don't need to actually cut services and stick these boxes onto people's front lawns in order to achieve that. And I would argue that there are an awful lot of hidden costs to those boxes that we're not seeing. I mean, just this week, Canada Post.
No way. So you're saying going forward, absolutely no more community mailboxes?
That would be our position, absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to answer my question. With no changes, status quo, do you accept that we will have financial issues in the future, 5 years out, 10 years out? Ernst & Young is a very reputable company. They don't just pull numbers out of the air. These are audited numbers. They don't make up numbers to suit a client. They're painting a very bleak future. Do you accept these numbers?
Your colleague, you know, mentioned that some of our members think that Ernst & Young and the conference board, they get them sort of confused.
I'm not talking about the conference board, just the Ernst & Young, the audited numbers.
Okay. The audited numbers from your Ernst & Young. What's going to happen this year? What do you think? First 6 months, 45 million in profits.
Yeah.
You heard Mr. Cheeseman yesterday.
And I'm saying like 5 years from now, 10 years from now,
I just want to start with this year, and then we'll go forward.
Short on time, though.
Yep. So he's talking about third quarter, probably another 45 million. Fourth quarter, every year, we're talking about another 120 million. So this year, instead of Ernst & Young's $63 million loss, we're going to start with over $200 million profit this year. Now, going forward, we will see. But what we've now crossed in the first 6 months of this year, for the first time, is the additional revenues from parcels are now outstripping the loss of revenues from transaction mail. Plus, you have the changes that we made in our collective agreement around delivery and around ad mail, and I would just ask...
Mr. Pickard, we're running out of time. I understand, you know, I can read the revenues are there, but my understanding is the cost to deliver parcels is a lot higher than transactional mail, so the revenues may be the same. And that's what the numbers in Ernst & Young show going forward. Revenues are growing, but the costs are outstripping
I would only
the
ask
revenue
you to
growth.
go to our website and take a look at the changes that we have made
Let me
to the
just ask
parcel delivery that will
Let
impact
me
on
just
labor
ask
costs.
again, just briefly, because we're probably out of time. I think in 2026, it's 700 million lost. Do you accept that? Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. McCall. I know, and I know, and I'm not going to be charging you any time on this, but I think it's worthy of trying to allow the witness to give a fulsome response, and I'm going to try and moderate that as best as I can. I know we're short of time, but still, if Mr. Bickerton has salient information, I think we should allow him to present it.
We get a quick overtime. Let's go.
The conference board estimated for this year a $600 million loss. This year we're going to have a $200 million profit, probably more than that. Ernst & Young estimates a $700 million loss. Probably there will be a significant profit in the year that they're identifying.
In 2026?
Absolutely.
Okay.
What we are now doing and what we have done in this negotiations, and it's very important to understand this, on both the direct mail, we are, as of the beginning of 2018, we are shifting the sizes, which will considerably allow Canada Post, they've told us, to considerably increase their market share. There's a huge market in direct mail. Okay. On parcels, we have, as Mr. Chopra mentioned yesterday, negotiated some very significant changes that will come into effect soon. So as Mr. Palachuk said, we are now delivering 2 out of 3 parcels in this country. Very soon, that rate will be even higher.
Probably be higher. Just very quick question then. Under the status quo, no more CMBs or anything has been suggested. You believe in the 2026 there'll be a profit and not a $700 million loss?
We have never urged the status quo. We came out with our paper in 2010 called The Future of Canada Post, where we advocated entering into new services, several new services, but including postal banking. We are not advocating the status quo. We want Canada Post to expand into new revenue-generating services like the French Post Office is.
So you don't accept Ian Weiss numbers? Is that fair? Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Mr. Greenwald, 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming. I had a Canada Post town hall in my riding, and it was basically dominated by postal workers. I would say that you guys are very passionate about Canada Post, which I admire. I mean, you guys provide a very good service. My cousin just got hired as a mail deliverer in Surrey, BC. He's super excited. He enjoys his work. But that doesn't solve the current problem that Canada Post has. At a very macro level, I sum it up in these few points, is that transactional mail is on the decline, but you have more addresses to deliver to. And then your parcel business is increasing, right? But that doesn't offset the fact that there's more addresses to deliver to, and there's less revenue coming in from transactional mail. And then there's all these different proposals out there to say, okay, well, you know, you could advertise on your fleet, you could do postal banking, you could reduce your workforce, we could end community mailboxes, we could do alternate day delivery to get to a future of sustainability for the organization. Now, a lot of your recommendations today said that, oh, Canada Post is profitable if you look at the numbers this way versus the International Accounting Standards way. And we could debate that. We're not going to talk about the numbers per se. Since I'm going to give a lot of deference to the fact that you guys do this job on a regular basis and I don't, right? I'm looking at the numbers from an objective point of view given my past skill set, and I don't believe that they're sustainable. But let me give you guys the deference and say that, okay, Canada Post is sustainable. But you're always looking to grow your revenue and reduce your cost, right? What's the 3 things that you think Deepak Chopra should do in order to save Canada Post's future?
Well, I think certainly actually opening up to innovation in a real way. I think postal banking is probably our best road to go on that. But if you look around the world, there are whole other areas that post offices have been involved in. In France, for example, La Poste is now a cell phone carrier. You can go and get a wireless plan and buy your cell phone at the post office, as well as do your banking there. I think expanding services, and there are a number that we've proposed. I wouldn't want to pick three at random.
Sorry, let me rephrase the question, right? So, again, even in your ranks, like at the postal worker level, they keep on talking about postal banking. It's not as simple as, oh, Canada Post should do postal banking, right? There's a financial element to this to say, okay, if Canada Post adopts postal banking, it will provide X dollars of revenue, right? It's not to the assumption that, and the assumption amongst your workforce, with all due respect, is that postal banking is this, the golden egg that's going to save Canada Post and provide hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. The fact of the matter is that's not going to happen. The reason being is that banking is well served in Canada, not all over the country, but in generally where most of the population lives, people's banking needs are served, and that happens to do with the strength of our banking sector. Wireless, again, nobody's going to open up the CRTC to provide, because Bell and Rogers and TELUS kind of control that gambit, and that's a discussion for another time. So I asked you, from an everyday perspective, where do you see the inefficiencies in your organization that can be improved that will help the financial sustainability of this organization?
Okay. Well, just before I get to that, to hit your point on potential revenues at Canada Post, I would say that with 29% of the population saying they would definitely or probably switch their banking to a postal bank, and with the big six banks making $35 billion in profit last year, I'd say there's a lot of revenue there. And I think this government is going to have to answer the question of whether they would rather defend public services or the profits of the big banks.
That's a great political argument, and I congratulate you for making it. I mean, the big banks are an easy target, right? But 29% of the Canadian population using postal banking is a massive assumption, in my humble opinion, that doesn't carry much weight. Having said that, we're not here to debate that, right? The question is simple. The question is this: on your everyday basis, what inefficiencies you see at Canada Post that can reduce your expenditures, and where else do you see revenue? And please just put aside postal banking for a second.
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, Canada Post is rather top-heavy. I don't understand why they need 22 vice presidents or a CEO that makes twice the wage of the Prime Minister. I think there's a lot of fat to be trimmed at the top, to be honest.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Committee. Mr. Pelchak, Mr. Pickerton, thank you once again for your appearance here today. As you know, we're just about concluded our testimony. We have a few more hours of witnesses to hear from, and then we'll begin our deliberations. For your benefit and for your interest, I would anticipate we will be tabling a report in Parliament probably towards the latter part of November. And should you have any information you wish to share with us prior to that, please feel free to contact our clerk directly. Once again, thank you for your appearance. We are suspended until our next witnesses approach the table. And to our witnesses, once again, thank you for being here today. I know you probably traveled from distant places to get here. But I think you know the process fairly well by now. We will ask for an opening statement. Madame Bertrand, I understand you have about a 10-minute opening statement. That will be followed by questions from our committee members. Thank you again for your appearance. And Madame Bertrand, the floor is yours.
Alors, good morning. Bonjour à tous. It's our pleasure to be back to meet the parliamentary committee that has been working very hard from what we've heard. And we're quite pleased to hear that because that means that you'll come up with good recommendations. On my right is Marina McLaughlin, whom you know already, and Jim Opson, whom you very well known, and he's traveled a long way home. And unfortunately, Christina Hug could not be with us because she had previous commitments that she could not, refuse. So thank you again for having us. We are here in front of you to remind you of what you may have forgotten or what you already know very well, but we thought it was important to revisit first, of course, our mandate. Évidemment, notre mandat n'était pas de...
Obviously, our mandate was not to make recommendations. Evidently, we had to make considerations not based on our perceptions or impressions, but based on facts. It was extremely important, and we had parameters to respect, which were given to us within the context of our mandate. Obviously, to forget any form of subsidy or to think about privatization. Therefore, our sandbox was pretty clear.
And we've respected every term of our mandate. Certainly, and you've met some of the people we worked with, Ernst & Young and Oliver Wyman, very rigorous people that have done excellent work, and we're very pleased with the collaboration we got from them. But maybe you know more about that rigor than the one we had for other dimensions of our work. We were as rigorous in making sure that what we were to consider and to assess was not strictly the opinion of a few people, but we went to really reach out, not to do consultation like you've been doing, but meeting with stakeholders to make sure that we were really understanding the different dimensions, the different aspects of a very complex and a long history of an important institution, not only for the people in government or the people working in Canada Post, but all Canadians are concerned and are touched by the future of Canada Post. So let me remind you what we've done. We have met really multiple stakeholders, and every time we met one, it was not one person. They were representing their members, whether I'm thinking here about the Federation of Municipalities, or I'm thinking about the Association of Bankers, or we met the Canadian Association of Retired Persons. We met, of course, with the different unions working in Canada Post. We met with postal experts, of which, of course, Robert Campbell, who had done the first study some years ago. So we were very thorough in understanding the points of view of clients of Canada Post as well as competitors. We met with UPS and we met with the Retail Council of Canada. So we felt that it was important not to hear complaints. That was not the objective of our meetings. The objective was to hear what was their view of the future. Did they have ideas of what could constitute the future of Canada Post? But our mandate was important also, and we were asked to understand Canadian views. And in order to really understand Canadian views, we had a website on which we were posting a question every week But there was also the necessity to go scientifically about understanding Canadian views. And what we've done is we've done an extensive survey among Canadians of all provinces, of all generations, and we kind of outnumbered the younger population, the older population, handicapped people, and even Native people. And altogether, we surveyed 2,400 people. And also, we have surveyed separately business people. And there again, an extensive number, 1,200 businesses were consulted. And it was small and large, and also from all sectors of activities. So it's important to revisit that, because sometimes in the discussion you may have had that we may have not stressed as importantly those aspects of our work. So it is with all those knowledge and suggestions that we've done our work of analysis. The analysis first of assessing the financial situation for now of Canada Post and its future by, of course, taking some hypotheses on the future we can see for the next 10 years, comment on dit ça, des forecasts. Et en même temps, we had to bring you the views, despite the fact that you were doing your own consultation you don't have time to do, of course, the kind of numbers we had with the surveys. So to bring you what was the opinion of Canadians, what was the usage they have for Canada Post, and how they project to be using Canada Post in the future. And the third dimension was, if there's a discrepancy between the financial assessment and forecast we have and the Canadian views, what could be the options in order to make sure that sustainability is ensured for Canada Post? And we worked there with Oliver Wyman, and as Ernst & Young, we talked here about consultants that have a very vast international expertise and have even expertise into postal services. And when we worked with Oliver Wyman, there was a first bundle, might I say, of options. There were more than 40 that were, at first glance, interesting. But when we dig into them and retaining the ones only that could fit our criteria, because the criteria was not what could be done in a very kind of hypothetical approach. It was a matter of saying we have 3 criteria. Considering the market dynamics, is the option viable? Considering the fit with the competencies of CPC, is it viable? And finally, is there a real potential upside? Saying that, of course, if the financial situation is not really in a pinkish tint, you want something that will bring possibilities. And that's how we have reduced our options. And that was really through a rigorous process and analysis. So our conclusion, and you know by now, is that the situation in Canada Post already is that one size doesn't fit all. It's already the case when you see how the mail is delivered across the country. But in the options that have been considered, there is no silver bullet. The financial situation, it's not about a tragedy. It's about being conscious and aware that what has been cannot be prolonged. Change has to occur, realignment has to occur, transformation has to occur. And what we have kind of described in terms of options are options that are interesting. Some are even, if you do one, you may not be able to do the other one, but they're not about solving all the issues. It's about allowing a bridge between today and the future realignment and transformation that we were brought to kind of have as a conclusion. It's clear to us that there is no single recommendation that can be done strictly by one of the party or stakeholder involved. The transformation and then thinking along the transformation and the realignment, even the kind of short-term or mid-term options, all require collaboration of all stakeholders, and that will be definitely a real challenge. For us, what we've worked every day for 4 months, very seriously traveled, not to the whole country, but from our home to Ottawa to work together, was really to make sure that there's a future for Canada Post, because it's clear from the surveys we've done and the meetings we've had to everybody, the future of Canada Post is important. It's not about strictly history and past, it's about working together to make sure there's a future.
Thank you very much, Madame Bertrand. We will now go into our 7-minute round of questions. Monsieur Whalen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee or to the task force for returning to speak with us. And thank you for your report. It provided an excellent guide to start a conversation. But I found that the discussion paper was highly focused on costs rather than opportunities for revenue and the desire of Canadians for higher service. And when I was listening to Canadians, I heard that they prioritized the service requirements that they needed for what they wanted to expect from Canada Post and opportunities for revenue growth, and that they didn't necessarily see that the cost battle was quite as dire. We heard over and over from the unions that mechanisms exist in the collective agreement to help manage costs with declining mail volumes, and so the corporation already has the tools it needs in its existing collective agreements to manage those costs, and yet we didn't see in the financial analysis presented in the discussion paper a reflection of the fact that those labor costs would reduce with the mail volumes. But maybe they were baked in. And so my first question would be to whichever one of you worked most closely on that aspect of the financial modeling. Did you take into account the fact that labor force reductions would be allowed to be undertaken in association with the decline in mail volumes and build that into your financial analysis?
I'll let my friend Marina answer because she's more our expert into HR issues. But I want to say that the conclusion of the negotiation, if you're referring to the latest terms that were negotiated, we're towards really the end of our work. So there is no, but what we thought was more central to the analysis we've done is the average age of all the workers and the possibility to kind of work the transformation with the decline of workers going on retirement. And that's a fine answer.
So, Ms. McLaughlin, was it not taken into account because the deal wasn't done, which is helpful to know?
Well, if you look strictly at the last collective agreement or negotiation, no, because like Madame Bertrand said, we were almost done. Sure. But in the review, though, we did consider the opportunity that exists with the financial l'état des finances de Canada, de Post Canada et la population.
State of Canada Post's finances and the union to determine in order to have the two meet in the middle, and for us to have a great number of possibilities, given that the average age is 49 years old. Many are leaving for retirement, and 70% of the CUPW's population is older. The idea was not to cut, but to accommodate departures and accommodate people without making cuts.
Revenue sources. In the pricing-based strategy, you did focus on the domestic part of the market, and that is obviously the lion's share. Did you get the opportunity to examine the international postal union rates and how those are expected to change in the next couple of years? And were those baked into the financial modeling that you did? I know that when I asked Ernst & Young that question last week, they said that they did not take changes to the universal postal union rates into account.
definitely that we've worked with Oliver Wyman, who has an international expertise and expertise in pricing especially. But let me, I don't know what you've heard in your consultation, but I know what we read from our surveys though. And from the surveys we have read that maybe Canadians are prepared to have a smaller increase like according to inflation. They're not prepared to go for increase in pricing as they've had recently in 2014.
Yes, so I'm sorry, Ms. Bertrand, the increases in prices that I'm referring to are for international post paid. So when someone orders something from China, China will get a flat volume or weight-based rate for delivery of small packages within Canada, and we heard from businesses that they felt that was anti-competitive. There will be some correction to that in 2018 with a rise in rates. Did your financial analysis include those? Did your financial analysis include those rising rates, or were you relying strictly on? Okay, thank you.
No, it belongs to government to raise those because when you consider this, it has a negative impact on other considerations, and we didn't feel we had the liberty to really entertain that idea.
Okay, well,
but we stated it in our report.
Thank you very much. With respect to the regulator, the focus that the task force report plays on the regulator really seemed to me with driving the possibility of private entrants entering the marketplace. But how do you feel, and this is a more broadly open question, how do you feel about a regulator that exists primarily to ensure that the competitive parcel market appropriately subsidizes last mile mail delivery and last mile parcel delivery?
Absolutely. As you know, I used to be the chair of CRTC, so those are the lines we were discussing in our task force and saying it can be not strictly to regulate the pricing of stamps, but it could be to regulate all the players in the parcel business. And rather than having a price cap, maybe you can have a ceiling. No, instead of a price cap, you can have a floor cap.
Okay, wonderful.
And also, what you can consider is to create a fund in order to subsidize the ones who don't have alternative and still need the last mile.
Well, speaking of alternative, what we heard from both the union and businesses who use parcel services and from the corporation is that they want to expand the number of days on which mail could be delivered. But your report provided an option for a reduction in alternative day solutions. So there is a bit of a gap there, and we've heard a lot on that, but it speaks to the question of, is Canada Post, by reducing services, abandoning a part of the market? If I feel that, and I hear from Canadians that there's a market need, there's a service they want to receive and pay for, if Canada Post abandons that part of the market, isn't that really encouraging further reduction in their overall revenue line? They'll encourage competition where they don't need to help their competitors.
Well,
Madame Lieutenant, a very brief answer.
Okay, well, we didn't push as far as how can it be realigned, but definitely those analysis and studies have to be done in terms of if you do this, what does it impair, and it has to be pushed. And qu'est-ce que tu dirais?
But we cannot mix either. When we proposed the alternate day delivery, we were talking about the mail delivery, not the parcel delivery, because we understand and Canadians want parcel every day. That we heard it loud and clear. What they didn't want necessarily was the mail, because they don't expect necessarily a letter every day. It's junk mail or it's bills. But the parcel, they wanted it right away. So the alternate day delivery was never for parcel.
Mr. McCauley.
It's great to have you with us again. We almost started with you, and we're almost finishing with you, so that's great. You surveyed Canadians quite extensively about stamp prices and option of paying higher taxes for sustainability of Canada Post. Was I reading correct that Canadians are quite opposed to the idea of continuing to pay higher stamp prices and taxes to subsidize?
Answer that one, Jim.
We heard that, particularly from business. They felt that the last increase had quite an impact on them, and it did have an impact on the amount of transactional mail that there was. So business is very concerned about price increases. I think it's fair to say, though, that within the general public there was an appetite for some, reasonable increases over a period of time, but big jumps where you would see the cost of transactional mail doubling and so on. People just were very, very much opposed to that, and made it very clear.
Yeah. What do you think are, say, the top 3 items have to be accomplished to keep Canada Post sustainable, from everyone you've spoken to, all the research you've done? Top 3 actions.
Well, I think what we've come to an early conclusion was that we came into the digital age. So we have to be first recognizing the fact that it has changed, not strictly for postal services, it has changed for many other areas of our lives, and not only business. So that recognition is very important, because then you can do, as we are bringing for consideration, some gestures in the short and midterm, like pursue the community mailbox, or exclude, of course, for people with mobility problems and downtown dense population. But even that will not really ensure the future. So in order to ensure the future, very important to go and consider more deep transformation.
Just I could add to that. I think from my perspective, what we heard was parcels, we have to be, Canada Post has to be competitive, cost-wise, and also convenience with the private sector. There has to be transformational work done with the unions, so that they're full partners and part of the process to determine the future, working together to see that, but also continuing to serve all Canadians wherever they are in Canada at a reasonable cost. Canada Post is very important to Canada and to Canadians, and they want that service to continue, but they understand that there are changes coming with the digital age.
What do you think, going forward, the biggest risks facing Canada Post right now, with, say, the business disruptor coming in for parcel delivery, more competition for parcel delivery, the pension issue? What do you think is the biggest risks we're facing right now with Canada Post?
All of the above, sir. Definitely the pension issue is an important one, because it's a very, the amount involved is very important. But it's also understanding that what seems to be the savior by the parcel delivery that is raising, because we are changing our way of buying now, is not in line with the costs. And until you are capable of really aligning cost and revenues.
When you say not in line with the cost, do you mean with competitors, or do you mean with previous business costs?
No, from what you bring your revenues, they don't contribute as much as the transactional mail was contributing. So because of that, if the mail is really declining as it has in the last few years and will keep on declining, of course the parcel business, which is kept with the, of course, the marketplace, you cannot play with it in a way where you would lose, of course, market space. Then you will have a problem of not having a real equilibrium between the two.
Great, thanks. We've heard a lot over the last couple of months, postal banking. We heard it earlier today again. I wonder if we've only got about 2 minutes, if you could give us just your thoughts, a final wrap-up on postal banking.
Definitely.
Its viability.
We've heard it, and we questioned and we investigated. It's not something that we had a preconceived idea. We really dig on that one. We heard of course, Canadian Bankers Association, scholars, and stakeholders, and we spoke also with organizations from France and from Great Britain that have those postal banking services. And even we've been told that if they were to start today, they couldn't do it, because there's been so many conformity obligations put on banking that they cannot conceive that you could start it today. Plus the fact that in Canada, yes, you have only 5 charter banks, but you have credit unions, you have Desjardins, and now you have the fintech and all the other type of financial institutions that constitute access. And from the World Bank survey, there would be 99% of Canadians who are covered with the actual services of banking. So frankly, from that point of view of our criteria that I spoke earlier on, is there a space in the market? We didn't see there was a space in the market.
Thank you very much for your commentary. It's good to see you again.
Mademoiselle Trudel, 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Ms. Trudel, 7 minutes, please. Thank you very much, and welcome yet again to conclude this. I know that it's been a long road and a great deal of work for you, but for all the members on the committee, there were long hours, many hours where we listened, which was very enriching. This is a subject that is important to all of us because Canada Post is a public service. It's part of our daily lives. There are people who are retired, people with mobility issues, who came to share their concerns, their worries, to see that public services could disappear. As I've already said, I was disappointed by the report. I was expecting more. I understand that you had a mandate letter and defined parameters, and the committee will, of course, be able to work on its own report that might be more in-depth. For me, this seems to be a pyramid, if I can imagine it that way. When I saw you, I heard you speak, and I've seen what you said in the report. We have Canada Post, we have workers, and we have the public that form that pyramid. The public receive services, and they have expectations with regards to public services. Everybody must make an effort, must work in order to ensure the continuity. I'll come back to services, but in your reports, with the people that you ask questions of, it seems that the numbers just don't match up. We based ourselves on 2011 numbers, whereas there was a lockout. Canada Post also had to pay a settlement for pay equity. That was a large sum. We did an average, and we did forecasts. Deficits were forecasted, and yet today, as we speak, Canada Post is making profits, what we see in the numbers. Earlier you mentioned that we could not draw hypotheses on new solutions and new ways of doing things, but we've been putting forward hypothetical numbers for the future, for the next 10 years. And the stakeholders that we've had come before us don't have numbers that line up. I understand that the firm did a great deal of work, that changes had been made. I'm not an accountant like Madame Bertanzi, but I would like to hear what you have to say. What is the difference? Why do we have numbers that contradict each other? And why did we base ourselves on 2011, whereas that was an exceptional year for the corporation? Thank you. We worked with rigor and with several components. The basic numbers come from Canada Post. That was where the basic data came from. We also have audited numbers, audited by a very responsible and recognized firm, KPMG, and Ernst & Young, with whom we worked. They analyzed those numbers. They didn't redo the audit, but they did work with those numbers. We said in our report, and we repeat it again today, that the numbers that we put in a forecast, well, a forecast remains a forecast. But we took the most conservative hypotheses. Well, and we can say that 2011 was an exceptional year because of the equity costs, but in 2014 was an exceptional year as well because we went from 62 cents for a stamp to up to $1. Therefore, there was an increase of about $200 million, which, of course, led to the corporation being able to catch its breath somewhat. We still have the history of the pension plan, whether it's 6 or 8 billion, depending on performance. Last time the valuation was 8 billion. And to have an ability to take into account the solvability issue. If we make $100 million of profits on a $6 billion sum, that's not a great deal of profit. In the private sector, that type of plan would not be very profitable. When we have this type of profit, it will be quickly lost when we have to take up our solvency payments again. And we also have a requirement to continue to invest in our business because we have to modernize and we always have to move forward into new fields, new technologies. That's how our projections were based. They were based on the fact that it's rather conservative. We won't argue over 50 or 100 million. It remains that. When we look at the overall trend at the medium and long term, we have a situation that is very sensitive because the basis of all this is that the letters that we're so attached to, we don't receive them and we don't send them. And bills and those other items, we pay them online. 69% of Canadians do that, and that trend is going to continue. Thirdly, advertising marketing, which we get through the mail. Well, we don't want to receive it constantly because it is paper that is wasted on many levels, and perhaps we could do this through the internet. And finally, the whole issue of parcels, which is increasing. Well, those parcels cannot end up with prices that are just going to keep going up because we are dealing with a market that is constrained by the laws of the market and not by regulatory issues, or not regulatory issues, but rather legislative ones. That's why we say the only thing that could be worthwhile would be looking at a regulatory organization that could perhaps set a floor for the price, which could also set a basic price for competitors, and that would lead to a certain amount of fresh air.
Is there time for me to respond to that?
Yes, please.
Just wanted to add, looking at my business experience, when you're looking at the past, you know, there's always a tendency for some to want to remove the good years and others to remove the bad years. So that's why you look at it over a longer term. In my past 5 years in the business I was in, 2011 was a very bad year for us, but 2013 was a tremendous year. So, but we have to leave them in. So you look at that 5-year period, and then as you go forward, you're trying to do your best analysis of a realistic forecast, of conservative forecast. So I don't think it's fair to say, well, you know, 1 year was this, and we should exclude that. You have to take everything in totality. And I think long term, the numbers indicate that there are going to be challenges as we go forward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Madame Ratanzi, 7
Thank you
minutes.
very much, and thank you for reiterating what your mandate was. Yours was a discussion paper. You didn't draw any conclusion. You just helped us to go forward and ask questions, and sometimes verify whether the, not the conclusion, but the remarks that you made were valid, invalid. And we heard a lot of contradictory information from what you heard. And what I'd like to do is just read something that some of the witnesses said, and it was not the unions. So it said that the task force paper of Canada Corporation Review was fundamentally flawed, and it ill serves the residents of Canada because it misses opportunities to take advantage of Canada's Post's unique strengths. And therefore, this is where the confusion comes for us. We're looking at it and saying, were you looking at it from an insolvency perspective, because that's, you mentioned it, or were you looking from an ongoing concern that can capitalize on opportunities? And I'll make a few statements, and please make notes because you will answer the questions. And one of the things they also said, and you quoted it just now, that 60% of the people, Canadians, do banking online. And the person who was looking at the source said The source you cited was Yahoo Canada, and readers of Yahoo Finance are no way representative of the population of Canada. So you can answer that question as well. And thirdly, your analysis of going forward concern, Mr. Hobson, you said you do not look at one anomaly, but 19 out of 20 years that Canada Post has been in business, it has been profitable. So if it has been profitable, you and I know that when we project into the future, you can project 2 years for accuracy. Even E&Y told us that their projections are not that accurate. I mean, so you can see the confusion people are facing. Viability, non-viability, sustainability. So what are some of the creative solutions? We had Oliver Wyman here as well. And you talked about, you looked at UK and France. Those are two densely populated countries. And nobody, even when we asked the question of Oliver Wyman, they didn't even look at Australia. So if you don't look at Australia, which is really a parallel population and size-wise, how do you come up with conclusions that, banking is not, postal banking is not viable? We've had so many presentations that in certain instances postal banking has been viable, that you have to look outside the box, that there was no integrated thinking by Canada Post. And the reason I'm telling you this is you're going to respond and I'll be quiet afterwards. One of the other things that they said you didn't look at was Canada Post shooting itself in its foot because it was creating competition for itself by opening up franchise stores whilst they had corporate stores. We learned from businesses that your analysis that ad mail will decrease because of technology is flawed. So here I am saying, so who is right, who is wrong, and what do I do? The floor is yours.
Question or statement, so you've got about 3 minutes left.
Okay. Well, let me remind you that in this analysis and this mandate, we had no interest. We're an independent committee. We worked really hard in understanding the business and really trying to pull on everything we could in order to describe to you facts. We were not trying to push any idea. As I said, we had some parameters we had to respect. So the 69% you referred to in terms of the survey, well, this is a scientific survey. This is what we got. It was 69% of the people who told us they were getting their bills and paying their bills through internet. Now, it could be, pardon me?
You did it yourself?
Yeah. No, it was, well, with a firm.
Okay. ECOS. It wasn't the Yahoo site.
No, it wasn't, yeah. So I think it's very important now. And we understand that e-commerce is rising. It's not at the ultimate. The solvency problem of the pension is not in our hands to present a solution. What we've presented is the options you have to consider. But it is a big weight that you can, for now, forget, because that's what, of course, the corporation has been able to do, given the holiday they were given. But it's there. And unless you change either the legislation, the rules, like in Quebec they've done last year, or in the New Brunswick, you're caught with it. It has to be considered. Australia, I'll let my friend talk about Australia here. And the corporate stores versus the franchisees. You will have seen that what we have kind of considered would be, is there a possibility that the moratorium that once was, because the areas were really rural and really very few population, today it's a different story, and now we think of Brampton, Moncton, Halifax even, but we forgot that, and we said if we push and we are trying to be imaginative, isn't there a possibility to use the corporate stores that remain in the rural and more remote regions as hubs? and for Canada Post to offer that possibility to partnering with banks, to municipal, provincial, and even federal services, and maybe even private sector, and to be kind of the meeting place, but also to provide comment on dit, un guichet unique for all kinds of services. So we've tried to really balance the interest of Canadians with the possibilities. And maybe you want to talk about Australia, Jim.
To hear Mr. Hobson talk about Australia. It's a big country, but we have no time unless Mr. Clark wishes to allow you the time to give your analysis on the Australian postal banking service. Monsieur Clark, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wasn't here for the first time you came to testify before the committee, but I'm very pleased to meet you. My first question deals with the solvability holiday that was allocated by the former government. Given the precarious situation of Canada Post today, financially speaking, and given the fact that our report is going to be published sometime in November, we're not going to have enough time for Canada Post to look at the recommendations and apply the changes, in my opinion, so that the things are going to get back to right the ship between now and 2017. There will be no choice but to prolong this solvability holiday. Look, the government, it's not us to decide what they're going to do, but in 2017, we already said that it could be 2017, 2018 in our report. And now the theories that we're putting forward for your consideration are numerous. In a Morneau Chapelle's report, they completely went over this table, which means completely forgetting the whole issue of solvability in order to overcapitalize that, as we have seen under certain regimes, and to look at other solutions that we're examining. There are going to be government-led decisions where we have looked at the overall possibilities. Very often, we've looked at the moratorium on the closing of rural post offices. I think this also applies to outlying post offices in outlying neighborhoods. Often, the perception is if we put an end to this moratorium, it would mean a disappearance of a pan-Canadian infrastructure held by Canada Post. Do you think that this moratorium is essential in order to maintain the pan-Canadian infrastructure that Canada Post manages, and should we review this moratorium? Well, this is an option that we put forward in our report. That is to say, when there is no other alternative, when you're in an isolated, a remote area, the post office is important for citizens. Where there is a dense number of people, be it in Halifax or Moncton, as I was saying, citizens have told us in the survey that the advantage of a franchise store is that the opening hours are longer, that they have an opportunity not only to stop to get their mail, but to do other things at the same time. And so it appeared to us that it's going to be an interesting idea. The value of the corporate office is an interesting idea, but for some areas rather than others. My colleague and I here consider that post offices in rural areas is an important issue. And if we put an end to the moratorium, then could we not save post offices in rural areas and close suburban post offices where there are a lot of franchise offices? So the objective that we have is truly this, but we're somewhat concerned by this because if putting it into an end to the moratorium means that there's going to be a disappearance of infrastructure. No, look, we don't want to put an end to the moratorium. We want to revisit the moratorium.
Areas better than I.
That's the key. We did not say that the moratorium should just be abolished and move on. Rather, to revisit. It goes back to 1994. We're talking about 2 decades or more. There's been a lot of change in Canada. I've lived in rural Saskatchewan for much of that time. I've seen a great transformation. So I think it's time to revisit. There still needs to be some controls in place and so on. But I can tell you from personal experience that post offices that are in community stores and so on are also meeting places, and the flag is there for Canada Post. So, but I think it's time that we looked at it and came up with a better plan as we go forward.
OK. Moi, j'ai pu constater.
I have observed, and my colleagues have observed, that when the Conference Board put forward its study, they predicted a deficit of $1 billion. Ernst & Young talked about $700 million 3 years later. Is this because of the five-point plan? Is it due to different state of the economy or different kinds of accounting? Because this five-point plan worked because then, we reduced the deficit by $300 million.
Last intervention, and I'll allow the committee to answer any other unanswered questions in about 5 or 6 minutes. Our final intervention, though, formally comes from Monsieur Ayoub. 5 minutes, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and very pleased to see you back again. As you stated earlier, it's an opportunity for us to perfect our knowledge or to complete what we know about the report that you have provided to us. I don't want to come back to the report. I don't want to come back to your observations because there's some overlap there. I would like you to share your thoughts and feelings about what's happening outside the report. That's a different approach, if you will. Often, the written report has recommendations and observations in it, but something arises out of a situation that you can't truly find in a report. As a committee member who did the study, I'd like to have your thinking. For you, Canada Post is at a crossroads. I understand that. But what isn't necessarily found in the report that you might like to see in the future for Canada Post? And working relationships, because since yesterday and for some time now, this is the trend that I'm really coming back to and underlining. There's an important gap. How did you see this? Do we have the same vision? Do you see that there's a gap? What's your opinion? It's a very touchy question you're asking. And being an independent committee, we also, in 4 months, we couldn't do everything. And so we stayed in our own little sandbox, and we didn't find a caramel secret. You have our deepest thoughts in the last considerations we put forward to you. When we tell you that there is no magic bullet, that there is a requirement to realign, that nothing, you have the recommendations. You can't do that without all parties cooperating together, in our opinion, and that this cooperation must always begin by the question, do we recognize together that the reality of the situation? We can't find solutions together if we, at the outset, see that there are things that need to be improved. When we want to work together, you need the will and the confidence to work together. Personally, what I've noticed is that there is a cessation of confidence, certainly between the unions, be it locally or nationally. That's a perception, with upper management. The progress or the potential for progress with upper management is not personalized to one face. It's a general lack of confidence, a flagrant lack of confidence. So how can we continue to move forward given this context where two groups, they doubt the question, the figures, they don't have the same goals, they don't agree on how things are going to work out. We're at opposite ends of the spectrum. As Madame Bernard has said, we're working within a framework, but we looked at Mr. Campbell's recommendations from 2008 and even earlier to say, yes, all these people have to come together, not only the union and Canada Post, but the government, the stakeholders, those who are benefiting from or those who pay for the services. All of this together has to happen. We may criticize the finances up to, a certain, couple of dollars here and, the he said, she said type of thing. But today, we said we're in a digital era. Mail comes like this throughout the world. you know, letters is a monopoly of Canada Post, and that's disappearing. It's not going to be there in the future. So unless everyone gets involved, the situation is going to deteriorate. You know, we realize that Canada Post has to be financially viable, cannot incur a deficit. But we agree that a deficit, be it the government who provides funding, or that we increase the price of stamps as we've done, no more than a 30% increase, which is huge. Not one private business could increase their prices in this fashion without having some backlash, unless it's a, in quotes, monopoly with regard to letters. So we find ourselves in an impossible situation. Jim will answer.
Really, what's happening is not much different than what we see in many industries and so on, and it's change. And in times of change, two things happen. You either pull together and come to common solutions, or you begin to attack and point fingers. And we've seen some of that, of course. I think that status quo is just not an option. There's going to be change because of digital, because of parcels, and so on. And we need the stakeholder, the federal government, we need the senior management, and we need the unions to work together to find solutions that will be good for all. Canada Post is very important to Canada, and it needs to continue to exist and be a strong entity, but existing as it is not an option. So I would agree with you that we need to come to a point where instead of saying one or the other is at fault, find ways that we can work together. We've seen it happen in the auto industry, where crisis brought about significant change, and we now see them sitting down together to hammer out solutions that will work. And so it can't be done on the backs of the workers, and it can't be done by saying that management is bad and they don't have all the solutions. So I think that's really the answer.
Thank you.
As I mentioned earlier, gentlemen, we've got just a couple of extra minutes, but there's a few, or at least two unanswered questions that I know that were posed, one by Madame Rutanzi, one by Mr. Clerk. I'll give you 5 minutes to wrap up if you care to make comment on those two questions that you didn't have a chance to answer.
Australia?
I'll take the difference in $1 billion and $700 million. I think a lot of it just is a result of the work that was done by Canada Post and by the unions. The 5-point plan, Canada, there were some conversions that made a difference. The price increase was very significant in terms of transactional mail. There were some efficiencies. There was work done through the collective bargaining. There has been a reduction in staff numbers, but there has not been a reduction in the cost overall. It stayed fairly stagnant, but at least it was contained. And then we've seen the growth of parcels and the revenue that's generated there. So I think that would point to some of the discrepancy. But even with the things that happen, there's still going to be a deficit at the end of the day. That's what?
On the Australian also and maybe Switzerland, those two, there's consortium on Australia. They've been created maybe over 100 years ago. We're talking of entering a market today for postal banking. There's a reason why Canada and the United States got out of that in 1968-69, because nobody was using the service. So we're saying to enter today with the legislation in place, with the regulation, with OSFI, with the international trades, plus that Canada are 99% have a banking account, and only 7% of the population that we interviewed through OGGO survey said that they would change. There's a percentage that say that maybe they would. We can all ask ourselves the question, will I change tomorrow? Will you change? But it is a lot of investment in technology, in risk, in money laundering, in cyber attack, in retraining, in having the right people in the right place. And for all of that, we said that we did not favor that option.
Thank you very much. Once again, Madame Mitterrand, Mr. Hobson, Madame McLaughlin, thank you very much for all the work that you've put in, the sacrifices that you've made for the 4 months that you've spent on this issue. You've identified quite correctly it is a very important issue to Canadians. And I think the one constant theme that we've heard throughout our travels and what you've underscored yourself, no one wants to see Canada Post vanish. everyone wants to see a healthy and prosperous Canada Post. Your work is, I'm sure, going to be able to contribute to that. Once again, thank you very much, and we will suspend for a couple of minutes until our next witnesses approach the table. If I may. First, I want to thank Minister Bryson for you once again appearing before our committee on the subject of estimates and the budget and the alignment between the two. I understand, Minister, that you have a brief opening statement, and yours will be the only statement from our witness table, after which we'll commence into a round of questions by our committee members. So, Minister Bryson, once again, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Et je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président, de m'avoir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for having invited me to return again to your committee to discuss reform of the estimates.
Here today with from my department, the Secretary of the Treasury Board, Yaprek Boltjulu, Brian Pagan, the Assistant Secretary of the Expenditure Management Sector of Treasury Board. Nick Leswick is here, Assistant Deputy Minister of Economic and Fiscal Policy at Department of Finance, and Siobhan Harty, Assistant Secretary of Parliamentary Affairs from the Privy Council Office, has joined us as well. Comme je l'ai dit la dernière fois,
as I said the last time I was here, I know that estimates reform is a question that is of a special importance to your committee. And I value your committee's input as we move forward.
This is either my 13th or 14th parliamentary committee appearance between the House and the Senate over the last year. I take working with committees very seriously as a parliamentarian. As I mentioned last time, this spring, June 2nd, will be my 20th anniversary, 7 elections, having been given the opportunity to represent the people of King's Hants. 16 and a half of those years, I will have been an opposition member of Parliament, 3.5 as a member of a government. As such, my views on these issues in terms of parliamentary engagement are shaped by somebody who has spent a lot of time as a member of Parliament and recognizes fully the importance of Parliament and the role that parliamentarians play, the fundamental role in terms of holding government to account. The ability to exercise oversight is the most important role that we as parliamentarians can play on behalf of those we represent. I'd like to address some of the key items which were raised by committee members last time and in subsequent meetings, and sometimes individual discussions and smaller groups. First, the desire for and the important requirement that ministers appear before committee to explain their estimates. On behalf of the government, I want to assure you, on the record, that our government is committed to ministers appearing before committee when invited to defend their estimates. We firmly believe that parliamentary oversight and accountability are absolutely crucial to our democratic system. Having ministers before committee when invited to discuss and defend their estimates is a key part of holding government to account. And you've got that commitment, my personal commitment, but the commitment of our government to make sure that is the case. That was laid out also in our mandate letters by the Prime Minister, who wanted, quote, meaningful engagement with parliamentary committees. We take that very seriously in our government. Second, I heard the concern about changing the standing orders to allow the main estimates to be tabled no later than April 30th. There was a concern that this would weaken parliamentary oversight because it would shorten the number of days parliamentarians and their committees would have to study the main estimates. To alleviate that concern, I propose April 30th for the first two budget and estimate cycles. This is important operationally because we are asking a lot of Treasury Board, Finance, and all departments and agencies to work together. This is a significant, substantial change, and it will take time to operationalize it. So we are saying for the first two budget and estimate cycles that the deadline would be April 30th. Having an April 30th deadline for the main estimates for the first 2 years would allow our departments to make the necessary adjustments and to give them time to ensure that substantial portions of the budget are reflected in the main estimates, strengthening the importance of the main estimates and the relevance of the main estimates. This approach will ensure that the main estimates will be, starting this coming year, a more useful and relevant document because they will reflect this year's budget priorities and prevent the situation we have now where effectively main estimates are debated for several weeks and are rendered basically irrelevant when the actual budget is tabled. In year 3, a permanent change would happen, allowing the tabling of main estimates on March 31st. I've discussed this with the former parliamentary budget officer, Kevin Page, who believes that this is a reasonable approach. He said, in fact, and he agreed that I could share this, quote, "While I believe Parliament and Canadians should see main estimates before the start of the fiscal year, I support your recommendation that this adjustment may take 2 years to implement." He's somebody who has worked both as a parliamentary budget officer but also within the public service broadly and understands that these types of significant changes do take time to operationalize and to ensure that we're getting them right. I do understand the concern I've heard about any potential reduction in the time available for parliamentary study, and I assure you that reducing parliamentarians' ability to study the main estimates is something we want to avoid. It's not our intention. Quite the opposite, in fact. We want parliamentarians to be able to study documents that will be substantially more meaningful than those that Parliament are provided with today. This is an approach that will provide the best balance between parliamentary study of the mains and making the mains a vastly more useful and pertinent document. A third concern was raised about Committee of the Whole. Tabling the main estimates by April 30th would require some form of consequential amendment. Under the current rules, it's up to the opposition to identify 2 departments which have their main estimates referred to the Committee of the Whole. The current standing orders give the Leader of the Opposition until May 1st to identify these departments. That deadline would obviously need to be moved until after that in order to give the Opposition time to make an informed decision. So we recognize the need to change that deadline in order to give the Opposition time to make that determination. Moving this deadline would have the effect of limiting the government's flexibility in scheduling these Committee of the Whole appearances. Last time I appeared here, there were also some concerns that our proposal would somehow reduce the number of supply days. I want to be crystal clear that that is not the case. Adjusting the tabling for main estimates would have no impact on the number of allotted opposition days or other aspects of the supply cycle, including planned supplementary estimates for the supply periods ending December 20th and March 26th. Committees would be able to examine estimates documents and call on officials and ministers throughout the supply cycle. A fifth concern was that around the current standing orders require committees to report back on the mains by May 31st. There was a concern that a month might not be enough time to fully scrutinize the mains. Again, we are open to your ideas on how to address this and considering them. This can be a discussion with the House leaders, but some extension on this that would provide more time we would believe to be reasonable, and that's a discussion that we ought to have between House leaders. But we recognize the need to address this and the potential to move that forward. Finally, some members of the committee have expressed the view that the budget date should be fixed. Mr. Chair, as you know, there's currently no requirement to actually table a budget. It's not part of the standing orders, and the timing of the budget falls within the jurisdiction of the ministry or the Minister of Finance. The normal practice is to table budgets between mid-February and mid-March. Extreme situations do arise where the government needs, or governments rather, need to avail themselves of more flexible approaches. I want to say to the committee that we're open to hearing this committee's advice on the subject. We're open to suggestions of the committee, and we will take those suggestions seriously. A lot of what we're doing now, Mr. Chair, to go back to 2012, a lot of what we're doing now is actually based on the good work of this committee going back to 2012. And there is this is important work in terms of strengthening the accountability of government to Parliament and strengthening the role, or to Parliament, and to strengthening the role of Parliament. We're committed to doing a better job of aligning the budget and estimates processes. I look forward to continuing our active engagement with this committee, but also across Parliament on this and many other issues. And I would be pleased now to answer any questions you or committee members may have, and our officials would be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. And Monsieur Drouin, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, and everyone for being here to discuss this important topic. Minister, I'm glad you've put this on the record that you've been a member of Parliament for almost 2/3 of my life.
That's just mean, okay?
But I want to understand why you're so interested in providing more transparency and effectively making the opposition's job easier to hold us or hold government to account. And can you elaborate why you're so interested in this?
I actually think it's, to be honest, as members of Parliament, even members of the governing party have the same responsibility to hold their government to account. So it's not just opposition members who have a responsibility to do this. All members of Parliament, even members of the governing party, whoever the governing party may be at one time or another, have a responsibility to do this. Committees by nature ought to be less partisan in the work that they do. I believe Parliament, in many times, with except 1 hour a day, where it's pretty hard to change that. But I think that Parliament itself broadly should be less partisan in the work we do. But committees, I think, should be held to a higher standard in terms of the work they do, in terms of not being partisan, and the responsibility to hold government to account by Parliament, by parliamentary committees for government spending is essential. And the current system is not designed to be understood. In fact, if you were to try to design a system to be difficult to understand and to be opaque, you would not be able to do a much better job than what has happened over decades. And as a member of Parliament, I can tell you there are people who have been members of Parliament for years who don't understand the budget and estimates process. And these are smart people, engaged people, good members of Parliament who have difficulty understanding what is a ridiculously opaque and unnecessarily complex and illogical system. And so the answer is, at some point, we should have a system that, in fact, not just members of Parliament and well, parliamentarians, I include senators in that, but the general public can understand. And that should be the objective. And I view this as an evergreening process. These are changes we want to make now, but as we move forward, I want this to be something that we work on an ongoing basis to strengthen accountability of government for spending to Parliament.
Just one more question with regards to the timeline. There was some issues raised with the April 30th timeline, and now I see that you're willing to make some changes for 2 years. And maybe to help this committee understand, what's the transition period that you must go through over the 2 years? Why 2 years, not 1 year or 3 years?
I've been reminded by YAPRAC that it's actually a year and 4 or 5 month transition, given the budget's only a few months away. And I'm actually going to ask, and I've had this discussion, and as a minister, We work closely with our departments and officials. We've got very good officials. And I've pushed very hard on this, and I am completely satisfied with the response. I'm going to ask Yaprak to speak to this. But these are very significant changes in terms of the operations of government. And changing something that has evolved over decades. And if we're going to succeed and actually get a good result from this, we need to take the time to get it right. And I'd ask Yaprak to speak to that.
The programs and initiatives that are in the budget versus that make it into the main estimates require a different level of detail and different level of preparation. Anything that is in the main estimates or any of the estimates, we make sure that the program design is there. We make sure that the Treasury Board has gone through all of the program details and the departments are ready to implement those programs the moment Parliament gives them the money. Right now, the next budget is sometime in the spring, depending on when it's going to be. We basically have 4 to 5 months, and departments are working on their budget proposals, but they're working at what they have been all these years at higher levels for finance consideration. So the first budget will be, we're going to try and catch up to what is happening, so hopefully we'll get quite a lot of them in the main estimates. The year after will be our first and only year to get the whole system aligned, work the kinks out of it, so that the year after we will go into an April deadline for the main estimates. So you basically have 1 full year of transition and the remaining months of this year.
How much time?
About a minute.
Okay. So when finance prepares the budget and the departments ask for proposals, what's going to be is there going to be a culture shock, because finance is usually very secretive internally with their budget? So is that going to require departments to share more information in order to get the main estimates ready in time? Or?
My colleague from Finance Canada also can talk about this. For the last 2-3 years, we actually have made quite a lot of progress in terms of working together. Of course, we're committed to budget secrecy. Of course, we should allow the government to make the proper decisions. But there has been very close cooperation with Finance and Treasury Board. But then we have to involve the whole of the ministry, all of those departments, to actually do the detailed work. That's the part that we're going to have to work a little harder over the next year and a half. But Mr. Leswick can elaborate.
5 seconds, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. I mean, I really don't have a lot substantive to add. Just that nexus between the Treasury Board Secretariat, Treasury Board ministers, our Ministry of Finance in terms of budget decision making, and departments as well in terms of submitting proposals that are well costed. That ecosystem needs to be well oiled and well functioning for us to meet our objectives as the President speaks to today. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. McCauley, 7 minutes, please.
Oh, okay. Thanks for joining us again. If it makes you feel better, Minister, I'll let you know, unlike my young cohort over there, your time of Parliament doesn't even scratch half my life, so it feels better. Yeah, I think we all agree, the need to promote transparency with the budget process and, the need for alignment with the estimates in the budget. I have to say, though, I am still a bit apprehensive about modifying the standing orders before we adjust the corresponding behavior when it comes to creating the budget and presenting the main estimates. Your predecessor, Tony Clement, noted several times in discussion of the 2012 budget about the reforms, and he said it didn't require a change in the rules necessarily, but rather a change in the coordination of the budgetary process. And I think that's kind of the path where I'm going down, is that changing the standing orders, it's quite an exceptional issue, and I think you've now recommended changing a second one for time to study the documents. We're now changing 2 standing orders. These are the rules governing the House, and obviously, very importantly, supersede the government of the day, and changing them is monumental and substantial. And we just want to underscore, the scale of the proposal, and changing standing orders is not something that we should just kind of throw out and, we've got a 1 day to meet the committee as a whole. We'll just do another change in the standing order. I think it sets a very bad precedence. A question I have for you, most is it the most proper way to go is a changing standing order so the budget and estimates can be aligned when there's nothing that says we can't change the alignment right now?
A couple things I want to address in terms of what you said, Mr. McCauley. Firstly, the changes we're proposing we think are very important and ought to, this is not about one government, and this is about long term. We really believe in looking at the report from 2012 from this committee, but also looking at other examples, the Australian example being one of the ones that we've looked closely at. This is more than a change that ought to be subject to the whims and the power of one government. This is something that we're engaging Parliament. We believe that it's warranted a change in the standing orders. Again, and having the flexibility whereby we're being totally transparent about the challenge operationally for the first 2 budget and estimate cycles over the next year and 4 or 5 months, April 30th, and then going to a March 31st, and which reflects both the operational challenges in doing what is a very significant change within the government, but also it adheres completely to the principle that's guiding us, and that is a better engagement of Parliament around the spending of government and the budget and estimates process. So, and I've talked to Tony Clement about this, and these are things, the broad changes we're proposing are consistent with his views in terms of the direction we're going. And I think this is something, we all ought to understand, and the importance of actually strengthening the accountability of government to Parliament on the fundamental area of government spending.
And I thank you for that. And I think, again, we all agree the need for transparency and better understanding of the estimates. I mean, there's people on this table who are accountants who say, yes, it's difficult to understand. What I'm trying to get at, though, is, you've mentioned there is no need to table a budget in a year. And I think it was 2002, 2003, a year where we didn't table a budget. We seem to be putting a tiny bit of the cart before the horse. We want the main estimates to align with the budget, but we don't address what happens when we actually don't have a budget. And what I'm also getting at is why not just, again, move up the alignment? Like, we can make the change without doing the standing order if it's that important to do.
There's a couple things here. One is that the budget is not subject to standing orders, and so what we're proposing here, and I think you'd recognize, and any government needs to maintain a certain level of flexibility to introduce a budget if there's an external or internal shock to the economy. Over time, as we make these changes and as we have an opportunity to understand fully the impact of these changes over time, I think this will drive a much closer, and there has been in recent years a much, I think, closer ongoing working relationship between Finance and Treasury Board on these issues. But it will drive and institutionalize a much closer alignment between budget and estimates. And I would be open if Brian or Nick have something to add to that.
I guess from a Department of Finance perspective, I mean, just to state, I think the clear merit of what is a budget and kind of that February-March hosel, which outlines the spending plans for the Government of Canada, and then an Appropriation Act or main estimates that follows that reflects the cash requirements for those spending plans. So without a doubt, I mean, that's the paradigm, that's the objective. And in 12 of the last 15 budgets, we've been on that cycle. And I think the proposed changes to the standing orders buy us a little bit more time to meet that goal, to give us some more time so that those spending plans that are reflected in the budget are incorporated into
I've only got about 30 seconds. Just let me interrupt and ask.
Sure.
Can it not just be done by, again, changing the line, like, I don't want to say speeding up your process, but keeping March 30th right now, like change the alignment time instead of moving it back to hopefully move it forward again. And I'm not advocating for a fixed budget date.
Mr. McCauley, if we use last year as an example where the budget came out on March 23rd, under current rules, we had to table the main estimates on the 1st of March. And so we were presenting the estimates, the certainty of the estimates in advance of the budget. Then we followed up with supplementary estimates A, which we tabled on May 10th. And that shows that we can work very closely with finance to bring budget items to Parliament very quickly. We had almost 70% of the budget in those supplementary estimates A. In this proposal, by tabling on April 30th or May 1st, we're bringing the main estimates, which will have the advantage of those budget items. And it is taking it's simplifying the process by removing that supplementary estimate A in the spring so that you're focusing on one document, not two.
Thank you.
The other thing, Mr. McCauley, in order for an item to be in the main estimates, as in terms of the current timing of main estimates, they really have to go through Treasury Board approval sometime in January. You know, that's right. So we'd have to, a budget would have to be sometime maybe in December or something like that. I mean, so there are timing issues that are addressed by what we're proposing. And again, I think you suggested that you would rather see the date be fiscal year end. When we last, I think the fiscal year end was the date. You were more comfortable with that than April 30th.
Comfortable where it is.
Yeah, but fiscal year end. Why would you want to keep it where it is?
Mike, well, if you'll allow me.
I mean, but I want to understand why you want to. I just want to understand why you want to spend so many weeks of your life as a parliamentarian doing busy work that isn't pertinent to the lives of Canadians. I'm just.
It was a rhetorical question, so we don't get into a debate. But we were quite a bit over time. Mr. Blakey, I'll give you extra time, as I will everyone on the government side as well.
Well, thank you very much. And I'll start by saying that we in the NDP do think that it's a good idea to try and better align the budget documents and the estimates documents, and that there's value in that. So thank you for making it a priority to try and do that. But there are concerns around the amount of time that parliamentarians have to study that document, however better it may be in terms of in terms of information, and there are concerns around actually ensuring that those documents remain coordinated. So to the extent that there isn't either a fixed budget date or a fixed budget period in which that budget would be brought in, then you can't coordinate two things if you don't know where one of them is. And so to the extent that the standing orders remain silent on the budget, it's hard to feel that this limited standing order change is actually ensuring any kind of coordination. And then, of course, access to government is also requisite for a good study of the estimate. So I think those are represented in the 6 concerns that you identified. And I'm wondering, I mean, we've had your assurances and the assurances of your colleagues, or you've assured us on behalf of them that they're prepared to appear before committee. But of course, we know that governments don't last forever. And as much as the latest infrastructure plan projects your government sticking around past 2023, Canadians may well change their mind. And with a different government, those assurances may not amount to much. So would you be prepared to consider changes to the standing orders that would require ministers to appear before committee in order to ensure that parliamentarians have the access they need in a restricted time frame to be able to get the answers they need with respect to the estimates?
2 things. The appearance of ministers before standing committees to defend their estimates is not a new thing. You probably, your dad would tell you that this was something that was fundamental. Ministers always appeared before parliamentary committees to defend their estimates. Any movement away from that long-standing tradition in recent years was fairly new. The tradition, the convention of this. What we are doing as a government is making sure we can speak on behalf of our government that we will, as ministers, appear before parliamentary committees when asked to defend our estimates. It is expected. I'm saying that, and that is, but this is not something that is new. It may be, you know, there may have been a time, and I'm not being partisan
and
here,
I'm not trying to suggest
in
that
the previous government, it may have been difficult to give ministers sometimes. Sometimes I said no, but I'm
not trying to suggest that that's new. I'm not trying to suggest it's new.
Pretty fundamental.
But we have an example of a departure from that practice. So as we talk about reforming process and the reforms of those processes, assuming will most likely persist beyond the life of this government, that if the appearance of ministers is an integral part of that improvement, we would also want that improvement to persist. So granted, there was a long tradition of ministers appearing, but we've shown, other governments have shown that tradition needn't have been maintained, and it's at the pleasure of the government really that's done. And are you open to the idea of creating, as part of your proposal, a situation in which there's an obligation for ministers beyond convention and tradition, but a standing order obligation for ministers to be accessible to committees for study of the estimates?
Again, I can commit on behalf of our government, there is an absolute commitment for us to appear, and our House leaders can have further discussions, always open to suggestions. But again, the issue, governments of different stripes over time consistently adhered to that principle, that convention. And so this is something, that I can commit on behalf of our government, that our ministers are expected to defend their estimates before parliamentary committees.
Well, we'll see if that's adequate ultimately, because we do have a situation where objectively the amount of time that parliamentarians have to study the estimates is being reduced.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, we have the word of your government that ministers will appear. One will carry into the scenario of a future government, and the other won't, because you can't commit on behalf of ministers of a future government that they will appear. On the question of fixed budget date, I know you've talked a lot about the Australian model. Can you confirm for the committee that in Australia there is a fixed budget date in the standing order?
Yeah, as you're aware, we've had that discussion, and I really do view the Australian model as being one that informs my thinking on this and provides a good model. And I think over time we get better alignment between and more logical sequencing between budget and estimates, that over time that may be the direction. But I want to try these changes. I want to try these changes first, and I want us to go through this, and we will have a better idea, Mr. Blakey, in a year and a half after having gone through 2 budget estimate cycles. And again, I view this as an evergreening process. We make these changes, we successfully implement these changes, and we may actually see new approaches that would make sense in 2 years. But I really do want these 2 budget estimate cycles. So I'm saying a year and about 4 months, we will have a much better idea as to other ideas or other approaches that could make sense.
So in the context not of your own government, but in some future government where there's still a shortened amount of time for parliamentarians to be studying the estimates, do you think it would make sense to deem those estimates to have passed by May 31st if the minister has not appeared before the committee?
I think we can have we can have a discussion. I can speak on behalf of our government in terms of the commitment of ministers to appear before committee and defend their estimates. Beyond that, one of the things I want to be clear about, the nature of the study that parliamentarians will be doing around main estimates will be more meaningful now, because you're actually, and when ministers appear before, you'll be able to have a more meaningful discussion about the estimates, because they will actually be pertinent, and so the work you do, the work we do collectively together, government and parliamentarians together, will be more meaningful and to the work we do on behalf of Canadians. And that's so the idea, in the first 2 years there are some things we can do to change dates in a way that would provide a little more flexibility. Much of those challenges I'm talking in a year and 4 or 5 months, when we would go to a main estimates table before the end of the fiscal year, the concern you raise about a reduction or perceived reduction in the days for scrutinizing estimates would be addressed. And during that period of time, we would do everything we can to ensure. Brian, do you have any?
Simply on the use of committee time, we have looked at committees over the last 3 parliaments. 17 of the 24 held a single meeting on the estimates, and the majority of those meetings were in May. Even this committee, OGGO, 13 of the 19 meetings were after the 25th of April. And so we do take the point that we are focusing effort here in the May period, but we believe that we're alleviating a problem by focusing that effort on the main estimates and not the main estimates and a supplementary estimates A at the same time.
Don't you anticipate that with a better estimates document?
I was extremely generous with you, as I had been in the previous speaker. So, Madame Shanahan, 7-minute-ish you will have.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Mr. Bryson, for being here with us and all the members of the panel. And I will not make any reference to my age or anybody else's age. Thank you very much. But I am very interested to hear, and as also a member of the Public Accounts Committee, let me just say I commend you on this initiative. We're already seeing in public accounts how important it is to have the program-based control structure in place so that we can make good assessments on the performance of departments and agencies and crowns, and that's going to help definitely in our work in the future. But here, of course, it all starts when we're actually doling out the money, and we need to know why we're doling it out. So I'm interested to explore further this incremental approach that you've taken to aligning the estimates and the budget cycle, and maybe some of the members of the panel can talk a little bit about what's involved, why have you chosen this approach, what are the challenges that you have, and because the last thing we want is for this to be not done properly.
Thanks, Brenda. There's a couple things. One is, and you reminded me, this is actually one of the 4 pillars of reform that we believe are important. Estimates and budget timing, which is what we're focusing on here today, but also this accounting approaches and methods and cash and accrual reconciliation for parliamentarians, a vote structure or program-based expenditure approval and reportage, but also changing to departmental reporting such that departmental plans and departmental results are a simpler and reportage to Parliament and to Canadians. There's 4 areas broadly. The need for some flexibility initially. All things being equal, if we could deliver the kind of result that I would like to within the fiscal year immediately, I think we would all agree to that. This will take time within the departments. It's a very significant undertaking that has and changing practices that have evolved over decades. And I want us to be successful in, among other things, seeing the main estimates rendered more relevant and meaningful by having more of the budget items in the main estimates. That requires a lot of work in advance between Treasury Board and Finance and other departments and agencies. It's a fundamental shift. And what we're saying is, when this committee raised concerns about this in the beginning, we believe that the proposal we're making, and that is a year and 5 months, whereby 2 budget cycles, we would have the additional period going up to April 30th, will provide us with the operational flexibility for our public servants and our officials to deliver a good result. And I think at the end of that, going to the budget estimates before the end of the fiscal year, I think that is a good result, and that we'll be able to achieve at that point. But we're being totally transparent about the direction of this, and about the ability to do to get this right in the first year and a half.
Thank you, Minister. One of the, and I'm sorry I missed the earlier presentation a couple of weeks ago, but one of the issues that came out was in the voting structure is that disaggregating control by program rather than nature of expenditure could reduce departmental flexibility and increase lapses of appropriations. And of course, that's something that greatly concerns us. On the performance side, the money is there, the needs are there. We want those programs delivered. So how would we be able to deal with these lapsed appropriations?
A couple things on that. One is there is the potential, for instance, for about going to program-based expenditure approval is something Transport Canada has done a pilot, which has worked quite well. What can be done is up to, say, 10% for the program could be transferred to another program within the department. There can be some flexibility, which can reduce the lapses. The other thing to keep in mind too is we are changing the reportage of lapses, or we have changed the reportage of lapses to Parliament. So we're being more transparent on that, and the PBO has recognized that. So we are actually identifying, the lapses, and which is the important thing is the transparency. What you don't want to get into a situation, and the reason why program-based expenditures, I think, is good for government, or good governance, and good in terms of transparency to Parliament. You don't want someone taking, hypothetically, money out of a border infrastructure program and using it to build gazebos or something.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that would be worrisome. Thank you. Chair, how much time do I have?
I'm just wondering if that just popped in your head, Minister. You'll have about a minute and a half, 2 minutes.
A minute and a half, so I'll share my time.
Thanks, Mr. Bryson, for coming, and thanks, Mr. Macaulay, for extending everyone's time. When we talk about the budget cycle, and there's been some discussion that the current process is ineffective or it's not worthwhile, but I disagree. When we had the opportunity to have a committee of the whole last year talking about what we currently refer to as the main estimates, but it's really what would the next year look like if we kept the budget the way it was. That is still a valuable opportunity to test over the course of the budget cycle whether or not government is achieving its goals. And so I would like to see, as part of the proposal, at least during the interim period, an opportunity for parliamentarians to have committee of the whole in respect of what would then be the interim supply, because then it allows us to say, to test the changes that government will be bringing forward in the new budget. And I would like your thoughts on that.
Well, in terms of committee of the whole, and we've proposed some changes here in terms of flexibility for opposition parties to have the opportunity to choose ministers for that. I think I understand, Nick, what you're saying, that the benefit of committee of the whole. I think committee of the whole would actually be more beneficial when you're talking about estimates which reflect more broadly.
Well, I'm certainly talking about both, so both in respect of the interim supply, and then when the main estimates are actually tabled, to give parliamentarians a chance to test the assumptions of the most recent budget year against future performance, and then see how those changes will measure up. I think it's good oversight.
Yeah, but beyond that as well, this will not eliminate supplementary estimates either. I mean, over time, there will be less of a reliance on supplementary estimates as main estimates become more comprehensive. Yaprak, you may have some thoughts on this because you've actually done committee of the whole with me. But any thoughts on Nick's point?
I think what the minister offered were some solutions. We're open to solutions from the committee, and the House is standing orders. But I agree, committee of the whole actually is quite a an amazing process, and it's actually good for transparency for all across.
I must say, I was subject to committee the whole. When was that?
Second week in the job.
Second week on the job, and I really enjoyed it. Actually, it was great. It was great. I like committee of the whole, and
we'll note your
enthusiasm for
we'll
that.
note your acceptance of the committee of the whole process. We'll now go to 5-minute interventions, and we will be strict on 5 minutes. Monsieur Clark, 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Clark, 5 minutes, please. Good afternoon, Mr. Minister. Morning, Mr. Minister. Thank you for being here with us. The official opposition wants to underline that any change that would provide more transparency and align budgets for main estimates are of merit in and of themselves, firstly. And secondly, clearly, on the face of it, we're talking about a reform of budget estimates and the way that they are undertaken. It also seems to be that behind the facade, we're talking about a fundamental reform of Canadian democracy. Let me explain why I'm saying this. In my opinion, there are two basic fundamental premises that oppose each other that you also mentioned in an indirect way. First of all, you're talking about the premise whereby parliamentarians would be able to better understand the budgetary process, estimates and the main estimates. That's the first premise. We cannot be against this because it is a good one. The second premise that you also raised is the need and the importance of making the government responsible and accountable for what it does, that is, the budget, which is the government's working tool, its hammer, if you will. So as these two approaches confront each other, and over the last 150 years of our country, the Founding Fathers and parliamentarians have chosen the second premise, that is, to the advantage of the first. They've chosen the premise which is to make the government responsible and accountable through oversight of public funds. And I'm coming to my question. I want to bring it back to you, a letter of mandate of Prime Minister Trudeau, which was published and made public. The fourth bullet point is to reinforce the oversight of public funds and the making reports clear and ensuring the coherence and harmonization of the whole budgetary process. We see the two premises, if you will, clashing one against the other, because your reform is proposing clarity, and then you're also talking about harmonizing the budgetary expenses. But your reform does not seem to ensure and reinforce oversight of public funds. The opposite, we seem to think, is happening. You stated it yourself, study more meaningful.
And the responsibility is less. Donc, il y a ces deux prémices.
So these two premises are in conflict, and we want to make sure that on this side of the House, that the second premise, which has been put forward and maintained by parliamentarians over the past 150 years, is not lightly changed. And now you're talking about a second standing order, and is there going to be a third one soon? So I'd like to hear what you have to say about these two very fundamental premises seeming to be clashing one with the other.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Clark. J'apprécie beaucoup.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I truly appreciate your question. But there is no conflict between our objectives and our actions, because according to the report of your committee, this committee of 2012, there were recommendations to take an orientation which reflects our direction that we take as a government, that is to increase accountability of the government and to make government expenditures more transparent for Parliament and citizens as well. And so our reforms are going to improve the current situation. Our approach and our proposals reflect the approaches of provincial governments, for example, Ontario and Quebec, and reflect international models such as Australia's. And so after a great deal of study by this committee and also our work in government, I believe that we can do better and that we should be doing better. However, I don't understand the position you put forward that there is a conflict between our approach and our objective and our aspiration to increase government's accountability. Well, if I'm sorry.
Thank you. I think Mr. Whalen doesn't want to ask any more questions, correct?
That's true.
Okay. Thank you, Minister, for being here. Thank you for taking into consideration our concerns from the previous time. And like you, I am confused as to why this is such a simple process and it's not being taken into the holistic approach that you're showing us. If you have consulted with the parliamentary budget officer, the previous parliamentary budget officer, who was well versed in the parliamentary processes, who was well versed in how budgets have to appear, and who knew that accountability and transparency was critical because we have to perform our oversight function. So my question is, when you were in opposition for 17 years out of your 20 years, what were the main challenges you faced trying to match these apples and pears? The apples being the estimates, the pears being the budget, and then how did you reconcile it? What was the transparency there?
Yeah, sure. Yasmin, you have the advantage of being an accountant. Not all of us are accountants. I was a finance guy, but we relied heavily on the accountants. And it is confusing as it is. And in opposition, we have limited resources, and individual members in their offices do not have a lot of resources in terms of legislative resources. I was very fortunate in opposition. I had Tisha Ashton, who just loved the estimates process, and there aren't many people like that. But she loved the estimates process, and over a long period of time, I actually got to understand them to a certain extent, not as well as she did. But there are people, each of our parties have people in our offices and in the leader's office and who are really love this process. The idea is we shouldn't need a limited number of experts who understand and love this process. Every member of Parliament and Canadians in general should understand a process that is simple and is easier to understand. This should be something that we can describe to any Canadian, the process, both in terms of the sequencing, but also things like departmental reports. You know, there are thousands of people in departments across the Government of Canada who are writing reports that almost nobody reads. And that's because they don't provide really these reports, and it's not their fault, by the way. The nature of the reportage now means that they spend a lot of time reporting with information providing information that isn't that useful or of that high a quality, that doesn't really reflect the basic departmental plans and departmental results. So we want to change that part of it as well. But these are significant changes, and I think members of Parliament and smart members of Parliament struggle with this from all parties. It's not just opposition members that have a responsibility to hold governments to account.
So all you're trying to do is simplify the process so that you can compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. Now, when you
even in terms of the accrual versus cash accounting and having a more robust reconciliation, and learning from some other examples, including Ontario and Australia and what they've gone through in terms of that.
Okay. I mean, in terms of the time to scrutinize the main estimates, for example, if we stay with the status quo or we move with your process, Would we be able to, will we be given opportunity to do the same robust review of either interim or supplementary estimates?
Yeah, there would be no change. There would be
No change to that.
No change to that.
Perfect.
The nature, over time, I think you will see less of a reliance on supplementary estimates as the main estimates become more robust. But there will still be supplementary estimates, and there will still be an opportunity to devote parliamentary time to scrutiny of them.
Time for us to review these things, because when we were in opposition, we were not given that much time. Not many people pay attention to it. So I've got a very short question and a short answer.
Yeah. Former Clerk of the House, Robert Marlowe, has recommended that, in fact, committees devote more time to the estimates, and we think that would, on an ongoing basis, we think that would be a good objective. I think making the process more meaningful will lead to that. So, you know, I think we want to see.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for being here. I do have, I guess, a question and a half for you, or at least an observation and a question that hasn't been asked, but I think it's very germane to this conversation. I'm assuming, Minister, if you're talking about changing standing orders, you would be talking about an adoption of a provisional standing order, not a permanent standing order, because a provisional standing order, as I'm sure you're aware, you can put a time limit on it. But it has been the convention of this House, when standing orders are changed, that they receive unanimous consent amongst all parties. Obviously, it's within the purview of this government. Through just a simple vote, you can change standing orders as you will. Is it your intention, Minister, to seek unanimous consent if you are trying to proceed with a change to the provisional standing orders? And secondly, what would your timeline be?
Well, thank you. First of all, we intend on doing everything we can, engaging Parliament to bring people together so we've all agreed in principle to changes that can strengthen the accountability of not just this government, but future governments to Parliament. We agree on that in principle, so I'm confident that we can get people on the same page, and so that's what I'm hoping, and that is reflected by the work we're doing here and the work we have been doing on an ongoing basis. The second question, the timeline, this has to be done. For this to be part of the budget estimates process, the next one, 2016-17, for the next budget, to do this for the next budget and estimate cycle, we have to, or 2017-18, for the 2017 budget, we need to do this really in November and maybe early December, but before the House rises at Christmas.
Thank you very much.
And I can say to that end, I have last February we did a briefing of members of Parliament. There were about 80 parliamentarians, House and Senate. We have since met with this committee. We've done a technical briefing recently. We have been, very engaged with parliamentarians in terms of the direction and seeking input. And today, as we said, there were 6 concerns raised, over the last period, and we have addressed them. And so we're doing everything we can. I'm doing everything I can. Our officials are doing everything they can in order to demonstrate absolute good faith in terms of what we're trying to achieve here. And we would expect, as parliamentarians, reciprocity on that, because we all agree on the objectives. And as a minister representing the government, I also have to reflect the operational capacity of what we can do. And I'm not going to commit us to doing something and fall short of it. I want us to get this right. So I want this to be absolutely clear. We're demonstrating good faith, and we want all parliamentarians from all parties, the committee process, and the work that your committee is doing, going right back to 2012, is important work. This is an evergreening process. The changes we're proposing now will inform future changes and strengthening of the budget estimates process, and fundamentally the accountability of governments to Parliament and to Canadians. So this is important work, and Mr. Chair, this is the kind of thing, you and I have been around a while, and this is the kind of thing that as we look back at our time as parliamentarians, that this is a time we can look back and say that we participated in a fundamental change that strengthened parliamentary democracy in Canada. And there aren't that many opportunities that we have as parliamentarians to be able to say that. And I hope that this is something, a grand project, an important project, that we can all work on together across party lines, because that fundamental accountability of government to Parliament and Parliament and government to Canadians is something that should be a grand project on which we can all agree and work to achieve.
Thank you, Minister. On those words, we will suspend, and committee members, we are next door, just across the hall, and that meeting will be in camera as we discuss the drafting of our CPC report. We are suspended.